If you've been on the internet at any point in the last month or so, you've likely heard a lot about the new Legend of Zelda game, Breath of the Wild. Like, a lot. Kinda non-stop, really. But here's the thing, as most people will tell you, and I'm no different, it really is just that good. I mean, I'm still reeling over the fact that this is the new Zelda game, a game that was happy to throw away nearly every convention of the games that came before it. Look, I love the Zelda series a lot, but if I'm being honest, it's been stagnating for quite a while now, since each game has basically followed the traditional formula to a T. For a company infamously known for playing it safe with their major franchises, it's insane to me that Nintendo would toss out the structure made famous by A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time in favor of an open-world game with a much smaller focus on dungeons and traditional storytelling. Of course, veterans of the series will realize that this game takes so much from the original game on NES, which favored and pioneered a similar no-hand-holding, open-ended structure. But as I played through Breath of the Wild, I couldn't shake a very familiar feeling. Something was reminding me of another game series that I love. And a quick check on Wikipedia confirmed my suspicion that this game's development was assisted by none other than Monolith Soft. Though Monolith as a company goes back to the early 2000s with Xenosaga, in recent memory, they're probably best known for Xenoblade Chronicles on the Wii and its successor Cross on the Wii U. Something that I think gets overlooked, however, is that Xenoblade is a first-party Nintendo series, as Monolith has been closely partnered with Nintendo since 2008. I guess Shulk's inclusion in Smash 4 should make this evident, but let's be honest, it's pretty easy to forget. The reason why this stuck out to me so much, and why I bring it up, is because, like Breath of the Wild, Xenoblade Chronicles Cross utilizes a huge open world. The first Xenoblade is also notable for being a JRPG with a pretty big world, but that game's structure isn't as open-ended as Cross's. As I played through Breath of the Wild, I found that many of the things I found so exciting or fun about the environment itself were things I also enjoyed in Cross. When Cross came out in late 2015, I was of course attracted to it because of my love for the first game. But, as I think most fans will agree, the story and characters ended up being pretty unfulfilling and overall disappointing. However, I still played a lot of this game, and thoroughly enjoyed it regardless. This was because, instead of an intense story filled with well-written characters, the main draw in this game, for me at least, was the raw thrill of exploring an alien world. In a sea of open-world game releases, Cross stood out to me as a game where discovering the world itself was the draw. Yes, it has side quests, many of which are collect X number of items or materials, or hunt down this monster, but the shallow nature of these quests actually often complemented the drive to explore. Typically, you'd grab as many as you can which related to the area you were heading to, and then probably fill out most of them as you wandered around. The game's movement mechanics also emphasize exploration. The jumping, albeit occasionally awkward, lets the player access a lot of areas that aren't important yet or not necessary at all. Granted, I really do wish the jumping felt a little better, because there's nothing worse than climbing for a really long time only to whiff a jump and lose all your progress. But, with some patience and practice, you can make your own shortcuts and find completely new areas. The other main piece, and the elephant in the room, are the mechs, or skills as they're called in this game. It takes a while to get them since you have to make decent story progress first, but the second you pilot one, you immediately feel powerful. What's great though, is that this feeling of power not only applies to the combat, in which you can easily crush threats that once loomed over you, but also in accessing more of the world. Traversal is now much quicker thanks to the car form, which feels good for these huge landscapes, and your default jump is much higher, so you can revisit ledges that were giving you a hard time before and easily scale them. Of course, what nearly breaks this all in two is the flight module, which allows you easy access to every area and increases your options tenfold. You'd think that this maybe goes too far and cheapens earlier exploration, but it takes so long to get to this point that it feels like a nice reward to smoothen out revisits and particularly tough areas. Besides movement, the other key element that makes Cross's world so much fun to explore is that it rewards you for doing so. Something which carried over from the first Xenoblade is that discovering landmarks gives you experience points in addition to filling out your map more. Since you have the tools to go basically any place you can see, you're encouraged to do so because you might find a neat new area. This is compounded by the secret landmarks you can discover, which may sometimes play into one or two side quests, but are often just there to be discovered. Take this huge area called the Divine Roost in the northern part of the forest zone, Noctilum. You never have to go here to beat the game, and it's one of the areas you can only access with the flight module. What's up here? Some materials, a couple boss monsters, and if you look up, the game's super boss. If you took the time to check out what was in this area, you found one of the game's most important pieces of post-game content, probably before you can even consider taking it on. What I think takes Cross beyond its predecessor in terms of rewarding exploration is the probe system. Probes are markers you plant in the ground that fill in tiles on the map, and depending on the location, they can even do stuff such as mining for materials and money, scout for undiscovered landmarks, and so on. Perhaps their most enticing feature is that they provide fast travel points, making long treks to specific areas much shorter. However, to place probes, you need to find the designated locations in specific tiles on the map. To add to that, while each zone has a few obvious ones, they're often well hidden and require exploration and even knowledge of the area to find. Your searches for these things will intentionally lead you to finding hidden landmarks, new paths, and so on, and at the end, you're rewarded with a fast travel point. Cross doesn't entice its players to do their own exploration by presenting a map automatically filled with side quest markers, but by making the process of discovery itself the real reward. You have to fill in the map yourself so you get a better understanding of the world and what you can do inside it. Like Breath of the Wild, Cross's huge world makes it such an outlier, but rather for its respective series, it stands out in an entire genre. Cross is by no means perfect, but its super unorthodox, much more western-geared approach makes it a fascinating JRPG. Breath of the Wild, however, takes many of Cross's strongest suits and improves on them to make one of the most interesting and well-crafted open-world experiences in any game I've ever played. Off the bat, I can give Breath of the Wild credit for handling its story much better. Say what you will about its quality, but it's a lot less invasive than Cross's. In Cross, a significant part of why the story landed so flat is that it was locked behind level barriers and special quest progression, leading to some absolutely insane pacing issues. Breath of the Wild's story is noticeably less complex, but the choice on how much will be completed is largely up to the player, as is the order of most major story beats. Funnily enough, this also contrasts past Zelda games as well, which were increasingly becoming focused on linear cinematic experiences. By shedding the conventions of its own series, its developers' past experiences, and honestly, most open-world adventures as a whole, Breath of the Wild pulls off its story in a much subtler way that complements its explorative and side content-focused gameplay well. As for adapting Cross's strengths, however, movement is probably one of the most stark examples. I remember being impressed by Cross's willingness to let me do all sorts of silly jumping and platforming to reach distant areas, but it was definitely limited by the finicky control. Breath of the Wild does indeed add a jumping button for the first time in the Zelda series, but where it improved the most would actually be the addition of the climbing system. I understand that the climbing isn't everyone's cup of tea, especially because events like rainy weather are admittedly super frustrating. But the ability to scale any wall in the overworld and climb for as long as your stamina bar allows you to is absolutely incredible. In Cross, seeing a far-off area early game usually made me think, oh, I'll have to check that out once I get my Skell. In Breath of the Wild, if I so desired, I could scale the highest of mountains whenever I wanted. The stamina bar is a really cool way to limit exploration without waiting for arbitrary story beats or certain items. If you value climbing much more than focusing on combat, you can spend your Goddess Orbs on stamina upgrades over heart containers. Eating certain dishes can also temporarily boost you if you're just ever so close to reaching something. Another thing that also reminded me of something that made Cross stand out more than most open-world games is the variety of environments. Both games feature more than just drab wastelands or the same forest or grasslands. Cross brought you to an alien tropical jungle, a desert full of mysterious artifacts, and the lava-filled hellscape known as Cauldros. This isn't even mentioning Sylvalum, which is such an otherworldly and strangely beautiful area. Breath of the Wild expands on the unique areas of past Zelda games and turns those ideas into huge mini-worlds of their own, essentially. Sure, you have the classic open grasslands like Central Hyrule, but you also have the frigid mountains of Hebra, the winding river that leads to Zora's domain in Lanayru, and the huge volcanic zone of Eldin. Additionally, I feel that the environmental conditions such as extreme heat or cold immerse the player even more in the world, because it forces you to understand and engage in its logic. What I think definitely gave me the most Xenoblade vibes, though, were the Sheikah Towers and shrines, particularly the former. As I found myself scrambling past tough enemies to reach the top of a Sheikah Tower, or searching around for how I can reach the base of one, it reminded me of searching for probes in Cross. While the Sheikah Towers are much easier to spot than the probe locations were, it similarly forced me to learn about the environment to figure out how to actually get to it. Also, like the probes in Cross, part of what makes finding Sheikah Towers and shrines so exciting is that, alongside other benefits like filling in your map, they provide fast travel points. For a world this vast, it's a huge help, and it definitely makes travel smoother. But because Sheikah Towers are actual locations, ones that give you a pretty beautiful view at that, it makes them far more memorable and exciting than Cross's probes ever were. This isn't even getting started on the shrines. In the 80+ hours I put into Breath of the Wild, finding new shrines never got old. Sure, to a point, you knew the reward would always be another Goddess Orb, but finding these small challenges, which also made new fast travel points, always took priority when I spotted one. There's 120 of these shrines scattered across Hyrule, and many of them bring you to interesting locations that are otherwise totally insignificant. But the promise of a Goddess Orb, a fast travel point, and probably some neat puzzles led to many hours of my playthrough dedicated to just wandering the lands of Hyrule searching for these. There are many smaller things that Breath of the Wild improved on too. Both Cross and Zelda cleverly limit progression by putting tough enemies in your way rather than straight up lockouts. Breath of the Wild does this much better in two ways. 1. Cross still does have some areas locked by story progression, and 2. Cross's enemies have the ability to lock on and do damage to you by nature of the combat system, which is way harder to work around than in Zelda, where skillful play and mastery of the controls can get you very, very far. I also think that Breath of the Wild side quests are far less egregious than Cross's were at their worst. Only a small handful relies on RNG, which in Cross made item collection quests sometimes horrifically obnoxious. Granted, I still think Breath of the Wild could have done even better by just not having busy work collection quests at all. To wrap it all up, Breath of the Wild has one of the greatest open worlds I've ever had the pleasure of exploring, and I believe it wouldn't have been quite as special without Monolith's touch. I'm not going to pretend I can say how much they worked on this game, because I simply just don't know. After all, Breath of the Wild was definitely in development at the same time Cross was. But I can't shake the feeling that there's something really special about the way Monolith crafts their worlds, and that something special helped make Breath of the Wild the gem it is. Considering Monolith also helped work on Skyward Sword, I think it's safe to say that we'll be continuing to see their assistance on future Zelda titles. With new games hopefully continuing to take the greatest strengths of the Zelda series and combine them with Monolith's skills in world design, I really think that we'll also be seeing some of the series' finest work. Man, how did I read this text? Look how small it is. This is ridiculous. Like, what?